Well, more than 130 cardinals are gathering in Rome this week for the start of the papal conclave.
The secretive process gets underway on Wednesday, but final preparations are underway. Today, workers installed those famous red curtains on the balcony at St. Peter's Basilica, where the new pope will emerge once elected.
What if the next pope is already chosen before any voting even begins? As the Vatican doors close, whispers of secret plans and hidden influence take center stage. With controversial voices speaking out and trusted sources raising concerns.
The conclave to elect a new pope will begin next week on the 7th of May. There's one round of voting on the first afternoon of conclave, and 135 cardinals will vote.
Is this really divine guidance or something else entirely? Stay tuned, because what's unfolding behind the scenes might change everything. The sacredness of choosing a pope. As the Catholic Church stands at a turning point, a question is being asked not only in Rome but across churches and homes worldwide. Is the decision to elect the next pope being guided by faith or by careful planning? Growing concern among the faithful have started to grow among devoted believers, not because of rumors or headlines, but because something feels deeply wrong. People who've always trusted in a prayerful and honest process now feel unsettled. One person, reflecting the concern of many, said, "This is not something to be taken lightly or used for influence. Choosing a pope is sacred. It should be guided by God, not politics." For many, it wasn't just a change in routine. It felt like trust was breaking down as stories surfaced, suggesting the process was being shaped more by tactics than spiritual reflection, external influence and tradition. Even more disturbing were reports suggesting outside interference. Independent sources claimed that intelligence officials from around the world had quietly made their way to Rome, not with force, but with influence. These officials were reportedly trying to ensure that the conclave's outcome matched the goals of major world powers. Some reports went further, suggesting political leaders contacted individual cardinals, urging them to support specific candidates.
Starting later this week, their focus will shift to selecting the church's next leader. The conclave is scheduled to start on Wednesday. The group of cardinals making the selection will gather behind closed doors inside the Sistine Chapel.
Unsurprisingly, many of the cardinals being pushed aside were known for upholding traditional Catholic values. Among those mentioned was Cardinal Robert Sarah, a strong voice for keeping the church rooted in its spiritual foundations. For years, he stood firm against modern trends he believes weaken the church's moral clarity. To many faithful Catholics, he represents courage and commitment to the truth. All of this raised a painful and serious question. Has the conclave, once seen as a deeply spiritual moment, turned into a power struggle? Macron's interest, political eyes on a religious seat. One of the most shocking revelations was the reported involvement of French President Emmanuel Macron. He allegedly attempted to prevent conservative candidates like Cardinal Sarah from gaining support. Cardinal Sarah has long criticized efforts to soften the gospel to fit modern political views, particularly around issues like immigration. His statements against false compassion and compromise have made him a target for those promoting a more progressive church direction. Additionally, concerns emerged about the involvement of certain French cardinals. Reports suggested that political conversations took place between the French government and some cardinals to back candidates aligned with modern ideals. This raised alarms among traditional believers who feared such interference could undermine the spiritual nature of the conclave. The silence of the church leadership. What adds to the concern is how quiet many media outlets and church leaders have remained. Despite the seriousness of the claims, there has been little response. Whether out of caution or fear, this silence has left the faithful feeling confused and unprotected. In churches, online discussions, and private conversations, the same questions are rising. Where is the openness? Who is standing up for the process? If outside forces are allowed to interfere unchecked, the credibility of the papal office itself may be at risk.
The customs of the Catholic Church are clear and carefully orchestrated. Once the period of mourning is done, the centuries-old tradition to elect a new pope, known as the conclave and shrouded in secrecy, gets underway.
At the heart of it all is a core belief. The pope should be chosen through divine guidance, not through politics or hidden agendas. Synodality versus tradition, two paths for the future. As the conclave approaches, the cardinals face more than just choosing the next pope. A critical issue is quietly shaping their decision: synodality, a movement for a more inclusive and decentralized leadership within the Church. While some view this as a necessary step to keep the Church relevant in the modern world, others fear it may undermine the clarity of Church teachings, shifting authority away from the Pope and towards regional bishops. This debate isn't just theological, it's becoming a political question. Some cardinals believe that the next Pope's leadership will define the future direction of the Church. Will it embrace modernity, even at the cost of tradition? Or will it return to its roots, upholding firm doctrine and centralized authority? But beneath this theological and doctrinal struggle, something more alarming is happening: external influence. As rumors spread, many Catholics grew concerned that political powers, both governmental and secular, might be influencing the conclave's outcome. Reports surfaced that global intelligence agencies were quietly exerting pressure behind the scenes, while some world leaders, including French President Emmanuel Macron, allegedly attempted to sway the election, aiming to prevent traditional voices like Cardinal Robert Sarah from being considered. Cardinal Sarah, a staunch defender of traditional teachings, especially on issues like immigration, has become a symbol of resistance to secular influence. His critics claim his firm stance against modern moral compromises, especially on migration, makes him a target for those looking to reshape the Church's teachings to fit contemporary political agendas. With such external pressures, many believers are left asking, is this conclave truly about divine guidance, or has it become a political contest? As the cardinals make their final decision, it is clear that the stakes are higher than ever. The future of the Church, its leadership, its voice, and its identity is on the line. Ambition in robes, political agendas within the clergy. This isn't a disagreement over style, it's a battle over the Church's soul. Supporters of synodality say it brings the Church closer to the people and reflects the diversity of its followers. Opponents worry it blurs the lines of doctrine and risks turning timeless truths into changeable opinions based on culture or politics. If the synodal side wins, some fear the Church may lose its firm voice in a world desperate for moral clarity. If traditionalists succeed, it could mean a return to more structured leadership, renewed discipline in doctrine, and a clear reaffirmation of the Church's role as a prophetic voice in society. To many faithful, especially those troubled by recent ambiguity, this could feel like a return to spiritual stability. But despite all the prayers, a deep concern lingers. Has the outcome already been decided behind closed doors? Some believe those pushing for the synodal model have spent years positioning their allies and shaping the process to ensure success.
A synod is a gathering traditionally of bishops that help the Church to walk forward together.
From influential appointments to strategic partnerships, everything seems carefully arranged. This growing suspicion leads to a painful realization. The conclave may no longer be an open and sacred moment of spiritual discernment. Instead, it could be unfolding as a well-planned operation, not inspired by the Holy Spirit, but shaped by ambition and politics. Still, amid the uncertainty, millions of believers remain vigilant and prayerful. They understand that what's happening now in Rome is more than a church election. It is a deep spiritual struggle that could shape not only how the Church is led, but what it stands for in a world hungry for truth. The Church's identity at stake. If the church begins to follow the plans of powerful worldly forces, it risks becoming something entirely different from what Jesus intended. What we're seeing today isn't an open attack from the outside. It's a quiet shift happening within, where certain voices inside the church, influenced by secular interests, may be steering it away from its divine mission. Believers around the world, though far from Rome, are united in concern. Their hearts are filled not with anger, but with a quiet, desperate hope that God's voice will rise above the noise of politics and ambition. Inside the Vatican, where holy traditions have long shaped history, a quiet tension is growing. The official tone remains respectful, but underneath, the pressure is undeniable. This isn't just about choosing a new pope, it's about preserving the church's identity. Through wars, political upheavals, and deep divisions, the church has stood strong. But today, it faces a different kind of challenge, one where spiritual truth may be drowned out by human plans. All over the world, from grand cathedrals to small village chapels, believers are praying earnestly. They're not asking for a certain name to be chosen. They're asking that the process stay faithful and untouched by agendas. They're praying that the cardinals, who carry such a heavy responsibility, will be brave enough to shut out pressure and personal gain, and instead listen only for God's guidance. Even with these prayers, troubling signs continue to surface. Reports, anonymous but credible, suggest that behind closed doors, early discussions have been less about shared faith and more about rehearsed talking points and hidden alliances. Some insiders say that groups of cardinals have already formed voting blocs, not because of shared beliefs, but due to strategic deals. It's not just a concern about how things are being done, it's about what that means for the church's future. The Catholic Church isn't meant to function like a government or a popularity contest. Its teachings don't shift with trends or public approval. It's meant to stand firm, even when the world doesn't want to hear the truth. Prophetic voice at risk, losing moral clarity. But if this sacred event begins to mirror worldly politics, the church risks losing its unique and prophetic voice. That's why the faithful aren't just nervous, they're heartbroken. They're watching something holy being treated like a political prize. They see church leaders sounding more like negotiators than spiritual guides.
We called on 3 religious leaders to give us a little insight into these holidays and to also share some spiritual guidance.
This sadness isn't about political sides. It's about seeing a beloved institution drift away from the calling it's always had. What hurts most is the quiet fear that spiritual truth and witness might be traded away for influence, image, or power. And these concerns aren't just held by scholars or bishops. They're felt by ordinary people, in quiet homes, in seminaries, and in every corner where the church still matters deeply. People who believe the church speaks with a voice that should never bend under pressure are watching and praying. A time of prayer and deep reflection. Behind the scenes, there are even whispered claims that some cardinals have been discouraged or even threatened against backing certain candidates. Some have allegedly been tempted with promises of advancement or special privileges if they vote a certain way. For many faithful followers, this isn't about scandal, it's about a sacred trust that feels shaken. And in this moment, the church stands at a crossroads where the outcome may shape not only its future, but its very soul. Some say certain cardinals were quietly told to stay silent, and that doing so would benefit them more than speaking up. While no one can confirm these claims with certainty, they've become too common to ignore. If they're true, they suggest a deeper problem. A climate where standing up for one's beliefs is discouraged and keeping quiet is rewarded. This has created an atmosphere of unease, where fear takes the place of freedom, and loyalty to principles is seen as a risk. Faith under pressure, preserving integrity. At the same time, global media coverage is subtly shaping public opinion about what the church should become. Many reports speak of the need for change, openness, and staying relevant in modern times. Yet little is said about spiritual depth, selflessness, or the unchanging nature of the church's message. Few voices remind the world that the Pope's role isn't to reflect culture, but to help lift humanity closer to God. In this environment, some cardinals quietly hold their ground. They've faced ridicule for holding on to sacred customs. They don't chase attention or speak out for applause. Instead, they choose prayer over politics, humility over headlines. These few individuals offer a sense of hope, not because they're flawless, but because they haven't forgotten that their calling is to serve, not to strategize. But their strength may not be enough in a setting where power flows fast and backroom deals carry more weight than spiritual reflection. Quiet battles, seeking divine guidance amid uncertainty. Even so, the Church has never relied on popularity or numbers to survive. Her strength has always come from faithfulness, not influence. And in the end, it won't be alliances or agendas that decide her path, but the quiet work of divine guidance, often unseen but always at hand. As the conclave nears, the future remains uncertain. What is clear, though, is that this is not just another leadership change. It is a moment that may shape the Church's direction for generations. The choice made in this time will either protect the Church's sacred purpose or shift it further toward a world that misunderstands her mission. All over the world, people wait, not with indifference, but with anxious hearts. They aren't looking to the media or political voices for answers. They're waiting for God to speak, for a sign that the Church still stands firm in her foundation. Inside the Vatican, the atmosphere is thick with quiet concern. There's no loud conflict, but a heaviness that comes when something holy feels exposed to danger. The cardinals move through ancient hallways with grace, but many carry hidden doubts. Some pray more deeply, others speak less. Behind formal rituals, a silent struggle is taking place, a delicate tension between holy purpose and outside influence. In a small chapel tucked away from the public eye, one elderly cardinal knelt in private prayer. His aged hands trembled slightly on the altar. The flickering candlelight touched his face, and in a soft voice, he whispered, "If we have lost our way, show us the path again." He had witnessed many conclaves before, but this one felt different. Not because of the candidates, but because something deeper seemed to be at stake. The heart of the Church itself. A sacred responsibility. The quiet before the vote. Elsewhere, in a quiet room lined with theological books, a few younger cardinals gathered. Their conversation was soft, not because of secrecy, but because they understood the risk even simple words carried. They didn't talk about who should lead. They spoke of deeper worries. That true belief was being pushed aside for popularity, and that leaders were starting to sound more like influencers than guardians of sacred truth. One asked, almost to himself, "When did we start caring more about being accepted than about being faithful?" Beyond Vatican walls, believers felt the weight of it all. The news of division and interference wasn't just concerning, it was painful. Parish priests noticed more people coming to confession, more requests for quiet prayer before the Eucharist, and more questions from confused members of their communities. One priest in Argentina wrote, "My congregation doesn't care who gets chosen, they're asking whether the Church will still be the same when it's over." Even among young people often thought to be detached from church matters, a new awareness was spreading. Online groups, student discussions, and small prayer circles were full of genuine dialogue. These weren't shallow debates. They were thoughtful talks about what the Church stands for, what it means to stay true, and whether her identity can hold firm in uncertain times. Some held on to the hope that the Holy Spirit might guide the Church in an unexpected direction, choosing someone no one had predicted. Others admitted they were afraid that the new Pope might move the Church further.
Beneath Michelangelo's masterpiece, The Last Judgment, the cardinals will take their seats to pass verdict on the next Pope and the future of the Church.
From the certainty and spiritual depth they longed to see. Yet all agreed, this was a turning point. Silent preparations, heavy hearts. As the hours counted down before the conclave began, preparations moved along with flawless routine. Security guards went over their steps, assistants made sure everything was in place for the cardinals, and the Sistine Chapel was made ready once again for the sacred event. Chairs were set, ballots arranged, and the chimney prepared to release the smoke that would signal to the world the result of their decision. But beyond the surface-level order, there was a quiet tension, something deeper than logistics. In quiet corners of the Vatican, staff and advisors spoke in hushed voices, some worrying about how future generations would look back on this conclave. A few believed that, no matter the choice, the Church would adjust, as it always had. But for those who believed the role of the Pope was more than just a title, that it was a spiritual responsibility, the moment carried a weight that couldn't be measured. Just a short distance from the chapel, a cardinal sat alone in a peaceful garden. Throughout the earlier meetings, he had said little, choosing instead to listen. Birds flew above, unaware of the deep decisions being made nearby. He held an old prayer book, its pages worn from years of use. Quietly, he read a verse. "If the Lord is not the one building, the builders work for nothing." It wasn't a criticism. It was a quiet reminder that no amount of planning could ever replace God's will. And as many were beginning to understand, divine guidance doesn't always come with noise. It often arrives in stillness. Echoes, beyond Rome, the world watches and waits. In that stillness, uncertainty grew. Some used the silence to form plans, others tried to listen for God's voice. Soon, votes would be cast and a new name revealed. The world would watch, but those who understood the depth of the moment knew the real story would begin afterward, shaped by how the next pope chose to lead, with courage or compromise, faith or fear. And far from the center of it all, in a quiet home somewhere, a family would come together in evening prayer. A child might ask, "What is a conclave?" And the mother, holding back emotion, would reply gently, "It's how we choose the next leader of the Church." But inside, her prayer would go deeper. She would be hoping not just for a leader, but for divine intervention. As the Vatican drew global attention, the silent tension began spreading across the world. Even before the voting began, the impact was being felt. In homes, schools, and churches across every continent, discussions grew more serious. From the bustling neighborhoods of Manila to quiet churches across Europe, many Catholics began to feel something they couldn't quite describe: an inner weight, a quiet realization that this moment might shape the Church in ways never imagined. In a small Polish convent, an elderly nun led her sisters through a midnight rosary. Candlelight danced on stone walls as she prayed with calm strength, even though worry pressed on her heart. When the final prayer ended, she looked up and quietly said, "We've seen many trials in the Church before, but this one feels different. It's not coming from outside, it's coming from inside." The room fell silent, not with fear, but with a shared determination to remain faithful, no matter what came next. On a prominent TV network, one commentator asked if the Church would move forward with the times or hold fast to its roots. But what many missed was that this wasn't about adjusting to current events or finding a middle ground between ideologies. This was about safeguarding something eternal. The conclave wasn't a political gathering, it was a spiritual moment that would ripple far beyond Rome. Within the chapel, a sacred moment of discernment. The cardinals assembled within the Sistine Chapel were not just elderly scholars, they bore the weight of millions of believers' hopes and prayers. Their deliberations, though private, would affect the lives of people in distant lands. The faithful in prisons, remote villages, and churches around the world would feel the impact of their decisions. How priests preached, how families nurtured faith, and how the Church's message resonated globally would all be shaped by these quiet moments of discernment. As the voting process began, the chapel was meticulously prepared. Every detail was accounted for. The sacred space, surrounded by centuries of tradition, was filled with reverence, not just for the task at hand, but for the sacredness of the event. The world outside waited, their eyes on the rising smoke, but the cardinals knew that their focus had to be on something deeper, on spiritual clarity, not worldly applause. For many believers, the question hung in the air. Would the church reclaim her bold voice, or would she soften her message in the face of external pressures? This was not merely a political process, it was a test of faith, an opportunity for the church to reaffirm its commitment to truth over convenience. The first round of voting passed with no decision, as black smoke rose above the crowd. Yet, no one left. The wait was not about the identity of the man who would emerge on the balcony. It was about the deeper question, whether he would embody divine light or merely reflect the world's expectations. In the stillness of the chapel, something profound began to settle. The initial tension faded, replaced by a deeper sense of purpose. The voices of ambition quieted, and all that remained was a sense of sacred pause, a reminder that this was not a contest of power, but a spiritual moment of discernment. Turning inward, a shift from power to prayer. Inside the chapel, amidst the pressures and uncertainties, a subtle but powerful transformation began to unfold. At first, the cardinals were guided by strategies and alliances, but as the voting continued, many found their hearts turning toward a higher purpose. One cardinal's quiet words rang out, "If we forget the cross, we give up the reward." His plea was not political, it was a call for truth, for a return to the core of the church's mission. As the process continued, the atmosphere shifted from tactical maneuvering to genuine spiritual discernment. Some cardinals, who had entered the conclave with clear plans, began to reassess, seeking not personal preference, but divine guidance. Outside, the world continued to wait, silent and prayerful. No one left, as the rising smoke became a symbol not just of the voting outcome, but of a deeper act of faith. The cardinals were no longer calculating moves, they were listening for the voice of the Holy Spirit. The moment of clarity came with the third vote. While not all cardinals agreed, something deeper had taken hold: sincerity, humility, and faith. When the white smoke finally emerged, it was not just a signal of the new pope, it was a signal that the church had reaffirmed its commitment to truth over ambition. The man chosen had not campaigned for the position. He had not sought power or position. His life of humility and unwavering faith had spoken for him. As he appeared on the balcony, his message was simple. Let us pray, not for me, but for the church, that she may be cleansed, made brave, and remain faithful to truth. In that moment, the faithful watching saw not just a new pope, but a return to something sacred, a moment when the church reaffirmed its commitment to divine guidance over worldly agendas. As the world looked up to the skies of Rome, a quiet moment of unity filled the air. Across the globe, lights flickered in the windows of churches, and bells rang softly, not just as sound, but with purpose. In every corner of the world, from monasteries to bedrooms, a renewed hope began to take root. It wasn't because the new pope held all the answers, but because he had stayed true to the deeper question. The conclave may have ended, but the true journey of the church was only just beginning. And so, a new chapter unfolds, not in certainty, but in faith. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching.